Welcome to Creatacast with your host, David Welch. Today's show is a little different. Today's show is, a little bit tougher in content. In my personal life, I'm dealing with some nonsense that without reading or writing, it'd be a very dreary thing to work through. So that's going to be the show today. Today's show is all about bibliotherapy, writing as catharsis, writing to improve your mood or work through whatever it is you got to work through. And that's what the genesis of this show is all about. A lot of people write to inform, to relay information. Others write because it's a gateway into their inner self. For me, that's why I think I really got into journaling and writing, is because it was kind of a quality that I saw in other people who are very well balanced, who are very well focused on what they were able to do as far as accomplishing goals and being on top of things. So one of the books that's helped me in life really work through things is Bridge to Terabithia. I think that book for me was fantastic. Unfortunately, I read it real late in life, so it didn't help me get through what I was dealing with. There were other mechanisms at play that did help me get through a tough period of my life when I was younger, but I can see how that book now allows someone to channel those feelings that come up without having to face that head on yet. The author of the book wrote it because I believe her grandson or son, I believe it was grandson, was dealing with a loss in his life at a very young age. And it's relevant to any age. I mean, it's not exclusive to young kids, but people who are older or may be blessed enough to not have a serious loss or a loss in their family until they're older, can see that as a mechanism to work through some stuff. And bibliotherapy is a thing. I mean, if you really want to get lost in a different dimension, regardless of what you're dealing with externally, reading is a great outlet. I mean, it allows you to delve into another realm, another universe, another time and period, and work through whatever it is your protagonist is working through, and dealing with what they're dealing with, and having those feelings be okay. Because you're not experiencing them technically yourself, but you are experiencing them with your protagonist. So, and that's part of the writing community. One of the things that I was taught early on when it came to writing is, hey, in order to be an effective writer, you have to have your heart broken. You have to have experience to have a reference point, to be able to draw on those feelings, those words, those mechanisms, those experiences to relay to others and articulate it in such a way that they feel your pain. And I think, a lot of the morbid work, a lot of the sadder side of poetry and the sadder side of stories tugs on those heartstrings because, reality oftentimes can be stranger and more intense than fiction, depending on the topic material, depending on the situation. And we, as readers and writers, need a mechanism or need something to channel that energy, channel that desire to lash out and be destructive, because we really can be. I mean, there are very valid reasons I could find myself at the bottom of a bottle. And, a lot of people are like, well, there's never a valid reason. Well, sure there is. That's why those substances are out there. They help you They help you remove your conscious self and allow for the suppression of those feelings, or does the exact opposite for some people. It brings out those inner feelings that they've been locking away all day. So it has a dampening effect, but it also has a trigger effect as well. Now, I'm not going to deny both. Both do the very same thing. Regardless, for me, it's the saving grace has always been in a book and has always been in film and literature of some kind. Poetry does this for me. Poetry is catharsis. For me, originally, I started writing poetry because I was a hopeless romantic. I was, I don't know, I was sort of like a depressed kid sometimes. Like in high school, I had like this persona of an edge, that I wanted to portray, and there was an iciness to me back then when it came to being accepting of other people's plight, whereas my ego was focused on me at the time. Not entirely. I mean, I did seek mentally and physically and spiritually out to people in a lot of cases, but not to the point where I would now. As a fully developed adult, it's just a different mentality. Now, going through tough times has always been a factor with people. And then there are many outlets. Some people get lost in the gym. Some people go enjoy binge watching films and laying in bed. And some people get to work writing because they want to get all those thoughts and feelings on paper and then, just have them out there, get them out of their head. And then there's the reader for the entertainment, somebody who will literally dodge some emotional missile and get lost in a different universe for a while because it allows them to run away from dealing with what's going on in front of them. So I want to talk about that. I want to open the floor about mental health, bibliotherapy, and other mechanisms writers use to work through the tougher, sadder, and sometimes nastier aspects of human nature and life. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, as I've once heard. So it's, it can be gritty. It can be nasty and visceral and menacing and anxiety-driven. All these words or terms you want to use to describe how people, or the gamut of emotions people endure and go through on their day-to-day jaunts through, the universe. Now, what I've seen lately in literature and in stories, we're somewhat desensitized to a loss. I mean, we see a loss on TV, like a murder or somebody dies or something. We kind of just park it as, oh, well, we know this is fiction, and not sometimes related to something that may actually happen to us, or that may actually come a time where we're dealing with something similar, and our first instinct is to check it at the door and not realize and not believe it. You don't want to believe what happened. So that's the first, echelon in the gamut of emotions. So, you deny it, you revel in it. Sometimes we don't move forward. Sometimes we get in a fugue state where we're just kind of just meandering, where we don't know where to go. We don't know how to process things. And the platform for recovery is multifaceted. It's not just one thing that's going to be a cure-all for people. It's going to be a combination of small successes and therapeutic recovery, therapeutic conversations, and experiences. So for me, when I'm writing my vengeful tales and my tales of wanting revenge and seeking justice, and I can definitely see a place in people's heart where they believe characters like the Punisher reflect their inner being because they feel slighted, they feel jaded, they feel victimized by a corrupt system or an organization of some sort. Now, for me, I mean, I think that's why I related so well with the character of Frank Castle. And a lot of people take like this, like a certain aspect of the character and revel in it without really appreciating the depth of the character. Same thing in the film Law-Abiding Citizen. There we have a character who has been faced with a traumatic thing, lost his wife and daughter, and the system just didn't do its job. It didn't do what we expect it to. And people feel powerless in their day-to-day lives. Not because that justice isn't possible, it's because there are other people who are literally just trying to exist or just trying to get by without really muddling up what they've got going. If it allows them to sustain themselves, they're not going to fuck it up. They're not going to. But delving deeper, writing allows the author to be vulnerable. So sometimes externally, vocalizing vulnerability is extremely challenging. A lot of people, there's a kind of a societal deference to vulnerability in the sense that sometimes it's even mocked. I mean, you could say, "Oh, why are you crying?" or "Why are you getting emotional? Why do you have these feelings?" And it's not it shouldn't even be a question of why you have these feelings. It's a question of what is the genesis of these feelings, and why am I trying to deter you from having them or being validated by them? So a lot of people try to have that tough guy persona or that tough girl persona, like, "Oh, you can't hurt me. I've got that machismo, that false bravery, that bravado that is exerted by every ounce of my being, from my scary tattoos to my visage, to the clothes that I wear, the sound of my voice, and the things that I do." So a lot of people, I mean, yes, sometimes having that outward look is appealing. Sometimes having that tough guy sense of self is very, very empowering. But is it the real you is the question. The real you is, if you're a writer, it's on paper. It's being poured out of your guts. And a lot of songwriters do this very well. They're very good at that correlation between how they're feeling in the moment. Taylor Swift is a master at this. How she's feeling in the moment, even about a certain person, and relaying that into their art. Now we as authors do this as well. We just do it in more subtle ways, and we do more of a biographical piece where we create a protagonist who's maybe a little bit more bolder, going things about a different way, or maybe they're a crime solver, and you're taking cues from your own protagonist to solve the mystery of your own situation. And that's what writing does for, at least me. It does. I know it does for a few authors out there, those listening on the wire right now. You've got to be thinking, what does writing do? What does it accomplish? One, yes, it allows you to accomplish being creative. It allows you to get your ideas and hopes and dreams and stuff out there with kind of a mask, a little box built around it. And that box is packaged in a nice, neat little narrative that allows your characters to run up against circumstances and face things without you being participatory or actually engaging in those endeavors. And you could, and that's where, for me, I pull off all my what ifs. What if I did this? Then it turns into, what if my character did this? what if he or she decided to go this route? I mean, Lewis Meyer did a very fantastic job of taking his character, a female protagonist, Bloody Jack, and really moving forward and developing a very developed world for us, a very developed character, and even the peripheral characters had very solid personality types that were out and that were very apparent. So channeling sometimes those experiences and that indifference and that fortitude and that ability, and sometimes we lack the ability in ourselves to see how strong we really are when we're experiencing circumstances. And the strength comes from being, sometimes stoic. Sometimes it comes from releasing those feelings and channeling it in a way that benefits oneself and others. So looking out is catharsis, and one of the ways we do that is we compose poems and songs and essays and things to add value to other people. That's how we reach out. There are people that sculpt to do the same thing. They do it in a multi-level ego thing, just like writing. But it's essentially an outward want, a desire to be connected to people without having the vulnerability aspect of having it be personal. Now, people journal all the time. In fact, it's one of the mechanisms therapists use to gauge the mental acuity. I wouldn't even say acuity, the mental barometer of where people are at and what their thought process is and how they're moving through things. So that's just, one of those mechanisms. So it's rewarding to put pen to paper. It's rewarding for me to keep a checklist, not just a mental checklist, but a physical checklist, to have a visual representation of success. And sometimes that's our diaries, diaries, journals, whatever have you. Whatever you keep your thoughts in, it is a visual representation of working through and putting down on paper what it is that's bothering us. And sometimes we may not even realize the extent of something that may be bothering us. It could be trivial, you think, but then when you start asking yourself these questions as a writer, well, what is it really that's getting my goat? What is it really that's, pulling, knocking my hair back in this situation, where it could be trivial on the surface, but it has a much deeper meaning. So my point that I'm driving to is, yes, we write to be creative and to get a positive aspect or a good aspect of ourselves out there to the world, but it's also exposing our vulnerabilities, exposing our desire to connect, and it's also a desire to get the reader of our work to really find you, that personality, that characteristic of you that maybe somebody else doesn't see. A lot of people can see my visage and say, "Oh, well, that's just a meathead. That guy just walks around with his beard and his mohawk, and he just wants to, lift and throw cars." Something. There's always this shock on people's face when I say I have degrees. You ought to see it. They just kind of look at you like, "What? Wait, hold on. You have a degree?" And that's kind of that reaction they have. They kind of have this inward, outward laugh that's supposed to be implying that you're joking, and then when you're serious, you're like, "Oh, well." Then they have that gravity to them, like, "Well, wait, you're serious," and it's all about judging a book by its cover. You can have the most amazing people be the toughest looking out there, and they're amazing. They're the best people, and you can have the inverse where you have the most squared away, clean looking person in the world, and they could be a monster. So it just goes to show that, what people are working through and how they're coping with whatever they're dealing with is a multifaceted process. And that multifaceted process for writers is to write and readers to read. And you probably have a book, or maybe even a certain poem that you reflect on when you're, in your most troubled times, or maybe you open yourself to creating a poem that reflects that period of time in your life. And it could be different at different times. One moment you could have that sensation of, anger. You could be like Goku on Dragon Ball Z and just powering up, or you could be melancholy. A lot in literature, you see that word melancholy being thrown around, and you don't really, I don't think, understand the gravity of what it means until you have a real melancholy moment, a real pause in your life cycle that says, hey, what you just experienced is valid. It's okay. It's tough, and you've got to, jump the fence. You've got to be able to get through this hurdle. But it's okay to muck around the mud for a little bit. Just don't lose yourself in the muck and get stuck. And that's the hardest part. Sometimes we get in a mode where we don't write. Sometimes I've probably spent the last week and a half walking by my computer and looking at it, knowing I've got a mountain of things I want to write and I want to put on the page, and just haven't. And it sucks. It sucks having that feeling of, hey, there are things that you want to do, but you are finding some sort of stopping thing, something that says in your brain, no, wait, worry about this instead of focusing on what you need to do. And that's writing. That's a writer's block. And I've heard it said that discipline is really a factor when it comes to writing, and you can have discipline where you make it a point that you have to reach a certain word count every day. Fine, fantastic. And then I have discipline when it comes to reading. I make sure I read the very least, a chapter a night, or a chapter throughout the course of my day. That way I can feel that progress being made. But sometimes the debilitating thing is sometimes that drive to do so. I've had books on my shelves that I've been wanting to read for grip. I've probably got, If It Bleeds. What's the other book? I've got a Tom Clancy novel up there. A couple other novels that are on my shelf right now that I've been staring at for months and just haven't read them yet. I've got a Western collection that I got real into and then kind of broke off and wanted to get back into and just haven't done it. I'm in the middle of an Ethan Gage novel. If you haven't read those by William Dietrich, they're freaking amazing. But sometimes we just have life come in, undercut us, and we need to, especially me, I need to go back to my roots of mechanism, my roots of coping and dealing with the strifes of life by writing and reading and drawing maps and conquering the world, so to speak, and writing and reading. Now, a lot of people do this in video games. That's why video games are so popular. It's like an interactive escapist novel at your fingertips. And that's why large-scale MMOs that have 24-hour access to those servers are highly popular, and that's why World of Warcraft still has, probably 8 million players worldwide. It's catharsis now. It's gotten to the point where it's just like a diary for them. They get on, they and play thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of on their tunes and raiding and whatnot. And writers do the same thing. We spend hundreds of hours writing and reading and rewriting and editing and all these things, or developing a writing strategy. Those are tough. And it's really tough sometimes to force yourself to write when you're just not in that mode. You're not in that mood. And it's hard to shift into that mood. Your brain can, absolutely can. But it's hard to jump into that mentality when you feel exhausted, when you feel weighted down by whatever it is, the circumstance that you're dealing with. So sometimes coming back to something is great. Like when you're refreshed and you've got that vigor again, sometimes writing does the refreshing. Reading does the refreshing. So once you're in it to win it, once you dive back in and you're like, well, why did I ever walk away from this? Or why did I ever not finish that story? Let's jump on it. And you master down 20,000 words in a few days and you're like, what happened? What happened to me? I became a writing monster. And that's why you have stories like, what's his name who wrote, it's kind of a funny story, Ned Vicini. And I miss that guy because he wrote that book in the span of a few days, or 2 weeks, I think he said. And that's after dealing with his own stint in a mental hospital, his own stint in a tragic situation that ended up becoming a catharsis for him. And he found his voice, he found his style, and then he wrote a few books following that. So that's what he did. I mean, he came up with something, a solution to a problem, but he had to get back in it and had to walk back into that mentality of, damn, I had this experience, now I need to get it on paper. So I just want to know what the writing community thinks. I mean, what are your go-to things when you're feeling glum and gloomy? And, is it writing that does it for you? Is it reading? Is it sometimes cracking open a good book and getting lost in that for a while? Or maybe your favorite television show? Because television shows and comic books are they're parts and many of the underlayings of literature. They come from a place of creativity. Often they're developed on the page, and they are a multifaceted look at a narrative that one person created or multiple people created. And that's why I love film. That's why I love comic books. Comic books are a twofold endeavor most times, where you have the writer who's communicating with the artist, and the artist is depicting what or that vision the writer has. So when you have these grand stories and you have a good artist depicting those stories for you, you can easily get going on a roll and be transfixed and really tackle some tough issues. There are some writers that are extremely political and they have a very strong political agenda, but you got to imagine what was going through their brain at that time. Maybe they felt some sort of way and they had to get it out there. They had to point out the hypocrisy of a situation. They had to examine within themselves and others how a situation came to be and whether it's right or not. Sometimes it doesn't even matter if it's right or not. It just occurred and they had to get it out in some sort of way. And it just came out through the creative medium of a book. It came out through creative medium of a script, reflective essay, whatever have you, composition. However it is that they were moving through those feelings is what people do. And I think it's a mark of a good society by how good their humanities, how good their arts are. And we in American society really value the artist sometimes. We don't want to pay a lot for that artist for some sad reason, but we do value them. And we've come to a time where we value actors, but the writers are the real kings of desire. They're the ones who've taken the time to ruminate and think and put pen to paper or type out, 129,000 word epic that people are just consuming at a great rate because they're so entrenched in the characters and the story. And that's what we get with Star Wars. I mean, if you look at the hero's journey of Star Wars, and Joseph Campbell is a very big proponent of George Lucas's life, you'll see that the hero's journey is evident, and people are enwrapped or engaged and find rapture in the saga that is Star Wars. And that's why, it's such a well-read, so canonized type of fiction that people will have running debates on the most minute details or something. Or even a better yet, Harry Potter. You get something wrong on Harry Potter, watch out. You've got 90% of the Twitterverse that's going to go, wait a minute. you need to correct yourself, mister. You said that it was Leviosa, not Leviosa. Or whatever minute detail that you decide to get wrong. I mean, heaven forbid you call Hagrid by something different. You got to watch out. Those Slytherins out there, those Gryffindors will come a beating. The Hufflepuffs won't really do much to you. They'll kind of laugh and sneer, but not even the sneer part. They'll just kind of politely be there for you. But yeah, watch out. You get the other factions pissed. And I call them factions because that's just the terminology I used. But anyways, if people are so entrenched and so embattled in their worlds that you or that one person created, that they become defensive of those characters, hotly so. I mean, that's why you had the debate or the war between Edward Cullen, Team Jake and Team, whatever the fuck, Edward. So it became an item, became a thing. And we do that. We do that because we've got to have a bone to chew on. We've got to have something to talk about. Now, especially, look at video games. Video games are a very, very precise narrative that you are playing out, especially the old games like Final Fantasy, Zelda. The reason people gravitate towards Zelda. Now, was it the best gameplay? Probably not. But the reason it was so gratifying is the storyline. People were entrenched and embattled in the storyline. They found super value in it. They were like, well, here's this amazing narrative interwoven with a playable game, and we get to make decisions that are going to benefit or be a detriment to our character. So, it definitely plays a factor. Now, one of the things that I love about reading is where it can take you. Not just where it can take you, but what it does for you. The intellectual stimulation, the reconnection, the developing of new synapses. I mean, it just allows your brain to fire on a different wavelength because you have to put yourself in a different mentality. Now, of course, I wish I could stop sub-vocalizing because I would like to read faster, but I think reading at that pace and my pace is great. It's the bee's knees. It works for me. It's what's great. Now, a lot of people too, have a purpose to their writing. They have an agenda. They have a mentality. They go in it with both arms swinging towards a certain goal. And I envy people like that. If you can really, shake a good stick at something in particular that you want to resolve or that you want to highlight, you can do that. And you can beat that horse, beat it down as much as you want. And that's powerful. So, Twitterverse, those who are on Twitter and listening, hopefully, I want you to go to realisticpoetry.com because they have those self-reflection moments. They have those visuals and they ask you to write a poem about those visuals. And it's very easy to go that direction where you have to be vulnerable. It has to go that direction where you have to express yourself and your feelings. And that's okay. Poetry does that. There is sometimes it's a certain line break, a cadence of a poem. For me, the Highwayman by Alfred Noyes has a certain cadence I just love. It's just a very masterfully woven poem that allows you to really see this love situation gone bad, and you're able to feel a particular way about it. You're left with, man, you have this narrative poem that knocks your socks off, and you're like, wow, that was very well articulated. I love the sound of that. I love the cadence of it. I love the content of the story. And if you have a good poem and it becomes story-like like that, I mean, it can move mountains. That's why, growing up, and when I was a junior high and high school and we got into Chaucer, I loved Chaucer because Chaucer's poetry and words were stories. You got the Green Knight, you got other characters and different things going on. You got or you even got the Lady of Shalott. Like that's a very well known narrative. People get into that. So I mean, it's easy to jump headlong into why poetry matters. At that point, because it's catharsis. Sometimes a poem may shift, may be that one mechanism, that one word, that one stanza that turns your whole universe inside out. Because you can go from the darkest glum to the brightest day. And I think the film What Dreams May Come does this for me. Because it'll take me to my lows and bring me right back out on a high. And it's great for that. It allows you to see that there are people that go through these vulnerable moments, and there is a landscape of turmoil in their brain that you don't necessarily see. So the next time you see someone and you've just come off of a high of reading some of the best books you've ever read in your life, or you're excited about something, give it to them. That's my challenge to you is you've got this great book. You're fired up about it. Maybe it's a standalone book. Maybe it's part of a series. And that may be the best therapy you can give someone, is give someone some new material, some new insight, especially if you know they're a bookie. If you know someone who is a book demon and they read books at Mock Chicken, then your best thing to give them is, firstly, get them an Amazon card. Second, you get them your favorite series, you get them your favorite books, and you ask their opinion, and you can discuss it later. I mean, it moves worlds. A good friend of mine, her name's Liz. She was a coworker of mine when I was at Grand Canyon University, and she loved the Bloody Jack series. I couldn't rave enough about it. I was enthralled. I was a huge fan. I was reading, I think, book 6 or 7 at the time, and she saw the book cover and was like, well, what's that about? And I was like, oh, you gotta get this series. And at the time, she was kind of like down in the dumps a little bit, not really succeeding. She wasn't hitting on all cylinders, and I can tell that. And when I gave her the book, it gave her something her brain could focus on outside of the workplace that allowed her to realign some of her energy to get back in the workplace. And next thing you know, she turns around, she's hitting on all cylinders and, doing really good at work. And you're like, whoa, what happened to you? And then she's like, I'm on book 3. I can't stop reading them. I love them. And at the time, I think book 7 and 8 hadn't come out yet. So I think I was on book 6, and I was like, oh, damn, she's going to catch me. And then she caught me, and then, we both read the last book in the series not so long ago. And it was just, she gave me a shout out on Facebook and was like, thank you for introducing me to this, dang near 8 years ago, 7 years ago. Yeah, it had to have been, 7 years ago. And I'm super glad for it. In fact, that shout out changed my whole landscape of my brain that day. I was like down in the dumps. I think I was protesting or doing something. And when I read that, it just, okay, life isn't so bad. I have helped somebody in some sort of way. And that's what I do as an educator. A lot of people, a lot of my students in my class are like, oh, you make us write too much. Because mentally, they're not in that place where they want to write. But once they do start writing, and they do start turning in their journals, and they have this practice, this ability to get their thoughts and ideas on paper out every day, then it becomes becomes a habit, becomes a mental exercise for them to get over. And it fosters learning, it fosters creativity, and it generates a a habit form, a good habit for people who hang on to it post my class. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, I get my students to write a 500 word journal every day that they're in class. So coming in, they already know, hey, I'm going to get through that 500 words today. And then after that, any other writing after that becomes too easy because, oh, well, I only had to write 50 words after that or 100 words or whatever. But if you get it out of the way early, you get all that, that creative juice flowing right out the gate, then you've created a monster. You've created somebody that will ultimately thrive on that kind of thing. They'll thrive on the being able to jump right on headlong into something and get going and work on getting better as you go. Of course, you got to give critical feedback, especially as a reader. As a reader myself and somebody who enjoys just reading and going through papers, I can really dissect them and give them back and give great feedback. And that's what you need to do. If you're a really good friend and you've got that one friend that says, hey, I want to take a stab at writing, and their work just does not cut it. You're like, oh my goodness, what did you give me? And you're reading it, it's nonsensical, doesn't follow a logical way, it's not good writing. Flat out, it's like, wow, you really need to, in your mind, you're like, well, you need to really go back to school, but then you got to turn your teacher brain on. Okay, well, we're in session, let's go. So you dive back into their work and say, well, here are my recommendations. Here's what you can do differently. You give them those recommendations. You provide them examples of that. And that's what I love, love, love about the book, Reading About Writing, or what is that book? It's by, I gotta look it up. Writing Like a Reader, Reading Like a Writer. Let's see. Reading Like a Writer. Yeah, Reading Like a Writer by Francine Prose. If you have not read that book, you need to jump headlong into it because it gives you excerpts, if I said that right, of other literature and different ways of writing by different authors that really gives you a taste of how you can find your own voice, tropes you can use, and things you can use to develop your own cadence, so to speak, when it comes to your writing. A lot of the British authors have a very particular cadence and very enjoying to read because I believe they're taught that way. They're taught to have a particular cadence and a particular way they compose their narrative. Whereas American writers, we take a lot of leaps of faith when it comes to familiarity with how we're going to compose our work. Which, is great too. I mean, sometimes it is very rewarding to see something different in a novel you didn't think would be there, and then it shows up and you're like, oh, okay. Well, that's great. That allows me to shift my mind from, hey, I'm having to read this to, hey, let me add this to my toolbox and bring it out whenever that need arises. So as writers, we're constantly developing our toolbox. And our toolbox is just, it's formatting, it's the way we compose things, and it's the particular cadence of our voice. And the reason this is therapeutic is because sometimes the hardest part of writing is really just finding your voice, because you get so used to reading other voices that you don't want to sound like you're riffing off them. And you want to have your own particular cadence. But that's okay. That is okay too. I think it's a compliment. If someone says, dang, your writing is very Hemingway-like. I mean, not necessarily Hemingway, but your writing smacks of this type of author. I think it's kind of a feather in your cap of, hey, well, I'm reaching the audience, and I do it and I compose it in such a way that it's being received well. Now, one of my buddies in college, I'm really trying to recall his name right now, but he had a killer Sin City style narrative that was amazing. It blew my socks off in college, and I was like, damn, I want to read more stuff by him. And I have no idea to this day if he's, written novels that are like that. But it was so well done. And I recently read an essay last night, not one of my students, but one of my colleague students, that was just very well composed. In fact, when I read it, I was like, damn, did somebody else write this? Because this is so good. But no, it was that student that wrote it, and what was good about it is it followed the format and line of thinking I believe the paper should have, and it was crafted in such a way that it was enjoyable. So sometimes reading a good reflective essay or a research paper can be rewarding, especially if it's done really well. So and that's what we get. The enjoyment of reading is to experience something new and delve into a world that we may see on our inside, but we don't experience on our out. And that's very powerful to acknowledge and understand. One of the points of today was to give you insight into vulnerability and being okay exposing yourself out there with how you truly feel via writing. And one of the ways we do that is 1, keeping a journal, 2, writing poetry, and 3, writing the fiction story. There's a lot of fiction out there that deals with heavy content, murderous rage, lust, betrayal. If you've read any good romance novels, I have pretty much all that packaged into one book. And I'm not kidding. I mean, they are, wow, they really, technically not the best writing, but it's some of the most consistent writing you'll ever see. I mean, they have a very particular format they follow, and it's rewarding and it works for them. But 2, it composes a narrative and a story that's high on dialogue and perception and body language and stuff. And before, in the mind's eye, it was really hard to perceive such a thing unless you were visualizing it. Now it's authors are so good that they can really convey and show a reader what they want them to see. Even to the point where you even see the sinews and the muscle striations of somebody when they're doing something or engaging in an act, and you're like, wow, it's stuff you think about, but you don't really think about until you've mulled that around in your brain. So, again, those out in the Twitterverse right now, those who are out there in the universe, call into mind your work, call into mind your fiction, the narrative that you're reading to, or the narrative that you're writing to really convey a story. So I'm going to read something that I wrote, and it has meaning behind it. Now, it's not a complete narrative. It's not a complete story. But I want you to listen and kind of understand sometimes the depths of the human soul that go into a work, and not necessarily indicative of how people, what people experience, but how they felt. Okay? So this is called Bruises. The one thing that mattered to us was that we stayed together. The transitions from elementary school to the rank and file motion of being in junior high is a frightening experience for any kid. But to us, it was especially hard because to everyone else, we weren't supposed to be there. We were the select few. Kids that came from the rural hours ride into the city. Out of the 20 or so boys and girls that were selected to head into the city each morning, there were an uneven distribution of students going to elementary, junior high, and high school. Out of the junior high group, there were 5 of us, boys, as close to each other as any siblings could ever be. Our brotherhood wasn't born from the fact that we were poor or bussed in from the countryside, but the game. Chess. D2 to D4. Really, come on. You said you were going to try. H7 to H5. No backing out, Seth. I wouldn't back out, even if your mother came hurling knives, Ted. Seth replied coolly. The boys' shower had stubby nozzles, spigots that shot out jet streams of water. There were 2 types of shower you could take, scalding or Arctic blast. We later found out that there was only one shower that had lukewarm water, which is the one Seth was currently under. Get him, Ted. He thinks he's a top player already. You show him. That's Johnny Boy, slick-talking Italian who boasted about the decadence of his home as if he lived in a mansion, especially his family's new chandelier. Why are you going to move there, dummy? Seth gets you in 5 moves or less. I'll take that bet, Brandon. The look he gave me when he tilted his head to the side was that of a man who'd already won. Brandon's Irish red hair and freckles stood out more against the shower room than the rest of us. You're on, Dave, he said with so much confidence that I began to waver in my own mind. But after playing him in chess myself, I was accustomed to his methods of psychological warfare. The next few minutes passed by with intense bouts of silence. There'd be a flurry of moves, then nothing as each boy assessed his game, keeping the mental picture of the chessboard in their head. It was an intense matchup. However. The beginning of the end started out with C1 to F4. Seth never turned to face Ted, nor did Ted turn to face Seth. They both stared intently at the green and beige tile of the locker room shower walls. Ted was the newest player to join our ranks, a novice in our eyes, and we let him get fired up over the match with Seth, our reigning champion and team captain. Johnny Boy and Brandon kept up the pretense that they were siding with Ted. The truth was, he didn't stand a chance, and we knew exactly what Seth was doing. Ted kept moving his peripheral weapons, a tactic that literally gave the match to his opponent. With a pointed finger to the ceiling, he shouted A7 to A5. Without even hesitating, Seth replied E1 to C3. Ted drew out the moves in the air like directing an army on a battlefield. H8 to H6. C3 to C7. Checkmate. Seth was silent after that. He let it sink in for Ted. Ted drew it out with his finger, and then punched the tiled wall so hard that his knuckles started to bleed. His portly frame shuddered for a moment after the impact. Damn it! Ted turned off his shower and started to towel off. As he did so, we all turned off our showers. Without losing focus on drying off, he asked, his breath coming out fast. You knew, didn't you? You all knew, didn't you? In unison, we all replied, Kinda. And it fell silent again. It was then I took my first real look around at my friends. The bruises of our home life made us look like badly painted chessboards. It was a sobering thought to know that we were all brothers in more way than one. So that's bruises. That's something that I wrote when I was feeling a particular way. I was recalling a certain mindset that I had when I was in elementary, not in junior high, but the game of chess has always been a reflection of myself and how I take on the world. Now, I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, even a decently good chess player. I won't even get that thought in my head, but I do love the game. I do love the strategy of games. And what I really enjoy about this narrative or this work here is that you're wondering why the title was fitting all the way up until the end. You're like, wow, what is going on here? So one thing that really pulls you in is what's going on, the shuffling of the cards. You know, I'm showing you what you want. I'm showing you what I want to show you. But at the end, you understand why those bruises come in. And not exactly where they come from, but you know that they are akin to a certain type of life, maybe even a lifestyle that you can perceive to understand. So this was written with a really stark goal in mind to have a coming of age story for young chess players. Now we've seen that play out in different type of films and everything like that, which is fantastic. And I haven't finished working on that story altogether, but it is what it is. Now I'm going to read to you a little bit from The Sounds of Silence, because I think this gets into a solid mentality of how I felt while writing. So The Sounds of Silence, and I'm only going to read a little bit of this. No one sees or hears me. The white walls, fluorescent lights above my head are a hodgepodge of squares and rectangles sharing space with cooling vents and ceiling tiles. Cubicles are aligned in small herds with slender walkways of ugly gray pale zigzag carpet. My face, a wall. It sits in the only space devoid of windows in the corner away from the doorway to the corridor that leads to the elevators that eventually leads to what exists outside of this level of hell. The cubicle of mine is a Spartan affair with black Dell stock office computer screen, desktop drive, and generic speakers. There are no pictures because my employer sees them as a distraction from the productivity that a quick glance to a loved one could obscure. The gray-cream theme of the desk and border adds to the uniformity of slacks, white-collared shirts, and bland ties. More efficiently attired are the earringless midwife-looking women working in the vicinity of their male counterparts. Once a woman was fired because she went against policy and wore a dress that cut off above the knee. All Christian Education is the name of the company I work for. The doors are fixed, but should revolve to allow the brief employment stints to gain impetus. Daily, new hires retreat as if set ablaze and shot from a trebuchet to a more liberal employer. The good ones, or model inmates as I see them, carry a Bible with them and use it to convince themselves and others that this institution is a part of God's plan. Despite the constant turnover, students of the uber-conservative finally have their liberal education that appeals to their rather narrow-minded ideals. My place in the land of mouse clicks, paper churning printers, and creaking office chairs is in accounts. A passion for numbers doesn't prepare you for the drudgery of being a certified public accountant. At first, as a budding CPA, I longed for the spreadsheets and opportunity to save a company millions and being recognized for my efforts. My dream is a collage of scenes where I am at my desk, 3 screens going with multiple windows and a background of the stock market for good measure. I'd use my time as I saw it chasing numbers and women and glory, and not precisely in that order. As for my monumental discovery, I would have it all. The fame, the women, the desk with the promotion, and a chance to hobnob with bigwigs of the company at a golf course sipping martinis like the Rat Pack. The truth is a far cry from that dream. The internet is blocked as badly as Iran, who recently had 1 day of unrestricted access. Every break in monitored gap reports tell the tale in black and white. The lack of Bible meant lack of conviction from our betters. The radiance of color meant someone was being denied the opportunity to make a life-changing decision. Despite this rather Protestant visage, the real scandals are the intertwining legs of cheating husbands and wives who find escape in each other, commiserating against the hardship of white-collar work. Secret rendezvous are scheduled with the same air of enthusiasm as an appointment with a doctor or barber. Those engaging in the gossip mill toiled constantly, rolling from one cubicle to the next because standing meant you weren't changing a life. I didn't escape out of fear. The idea of unemployment in the market scared me despite my credentials. I've heard and read stories of some of my schoolmates from college getting dismissed and similarly annihilating their entire family due to the lack of prospects and change in their lifestyle. The pressure was monumentous, even for me, whose sole dependent was a cat aptly named Garfield, though I thought of changing his name because at least John in the comic had Arlene. My Arlene left me via text message after one of the most amazing weekends of my life. We'd met at my brother's bachelor party. She was at the club with a friend, and our chemistry upon eye contact was a tempest. We'd rocked each other's worlds for the 7 days I was home for the wedding. Afterwards, I flew back to my 300 days of sunshine on cloud 9. I quickly made plans for her to join me for the weekend in sort of a trade-off trip relationship. Work mattered little when I could come home and Skype for hours instead of watching the newest editions from Netflix. Unlike Arlene, she was a beautiful blonde with piercing blue orbs she called eyes. She flew in. I treated her to the finest restaurants I knew. If we weren't dining out, I made her breakfast in bed. Physically, I think we'd done the marathon's effort in bed, finally collapsing into each other with the inability to roll over, much less leave the house. Eerily, during our goodbye, she said little, while I expressed every cheesy line I could muster at the time. Days later, after receiving no word, she finally sent me the most damning text a man could ever receive. It reads thus: I'm sorry about the lack of communication, but this will be my last correspondence. I can't handle the separation. You're a great guy, and I'm sure you will find someone there that you can have a great relationship with. It is easier to do this now than drag it out, making it hurt more than it already does. Please, let's just move on. Don't try to contact me, because I will cry. I am crying as I send this. You will not remember me in a few weeks, and I am glad of the time we had together. It was robotic. The day I received this, my phone broke. Not of my slamming it repeatedly like I wanted, but it simply turned off and wouldn't take a charge. I'd nearly forgotten about it because our security collects them at the beginning of the workday. I simply left mine in there every day. It was after my heart broke that everything else started close. Everything else started to... Where am I? Oh, everything else started to break in lightning fashion. Not only did everything break, but I believe that I am now invisible. Invisible man. Can you hold that elevator? It was a screech, not a simple request. The doors were closing as I raced to meet them, and if anything, drive my satchel in between the doors and get in. I was too late. Had they not heard my plea, or had they simply not given a damn? It is rather ironic that today's Christians cast the first stone in judgment. It seems rather trite to think that being left standing at an elevator, but several observations have led to this conclusion. First, Jesus ate with tax collectors, prostitutes, gamblers, and soldiers, people he placed on station with him after his sacrifice. However, my colleagues would have you believe that you aren't saved unless you submit to him and the opinion and non-biblical understandings of their pastors. I recall sneezing, and one voice rose above the cubicles to issue a "bless you" that followed by a tirade from another man. You know the pastor doesn't say bless you. He says that's not your job to bless anyone, much less a man who isn't saved. It's like their understanding of physical sports among men. One fall morning, I heard the jubilant expression, "It's football season," quickly followed by a sermonly. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spake as a child. When I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. We never heard this or any other sport praised again. It was viewed that sports aren't the true labor of men. There are but a few examples of how things are understood where I work. Exasperated, I took to the stairs. Upon reaching my desk, I wasn't surprised to see the monument of papers dedicated to my attention in need of analyzing and inserting into a database. This stack comprises of nearly every ounce of my work time to complete. I have come to believe they are perfectly measured to exact every ounce of work from me. Still recovering from the shock of at being single again, I looked forward to Garfield only. I don't have an Odie to nuzzle, when the cat decides to be Heathcliff and scurry off to join his band of brigands when he is outside. He returns to get yum-yums and my full attention for a period of 20 minutes, and then I am left to my own devices. That used to consist of opening Skype to learn the latest from my recently ex-girlfriend. With that gone, I have nothing planned. What did I do before her? I'm going to go ahead and end right there, but as you can see, there was a particular mode I was writing in, and that robotic email that my protagonist received is a very real email that I received. I mean, it was harsh. I was like, ooh, I was devastated. Devastated is not even the right word. I was crushed. But, it's how I felt. And the further you go along, the further you realize, hey, this motherfucker might actually be invisible. Is he a ghost? Is that a thing? So those are things I explore. And if you want to read The Sounds of Silence, it is in my book, Hell's Waiting Room and Other Stories. You can get to the bottom of what really happens to my protagonist, what his name is, even. So, there was a mode, and it was cathartic to write it. I really, really enjoyed writing that story, even though it was morose. It was very... trying to find the word. It had a particular cadence. It had a particular way I was writing. It was very particular in the mood I felt when I was writing it. So, and that's just an idea of what you can do as a writer to work through some of the things that you're dealing with in the conscious or unconscious mind. And it helps me realize the depths of what's, going on in the inner turmoil. I did work at Grand Canyon University. That's a Christian school. I did experience a breakup like that, but, not everything in there is 100% true. Of course, there's some stretching when it comes to the narrative, but that's what you get. That's what you get. You get to turn these tough feelings into something more visceral and uncanny and things like that. So, yeah, that's what you do as a writer. It's your catharsis. It's your journal. When it comes to reading, and I delved into doing a reading for a long while. And here's what I plan on doing when it comes to something else that is added to my wheelhouse of creativity is podcasting. It is allowing me to shift from one way of being into another and reaching out to my audience, reaching out to the community at large to embrace the writing community in a certain way of being, a certain way of understanding. I'm still open to taking a lot of submissions. Please submit your work to dwelch9627@gmail.com. That way I can add your work to what I read on a weekly basis. Like I said, going into the week that I'm going to be doing 2 shows a week. So expect the show probably Tuesday, Fridays. I know I didn't do my show last Tuesday, but I'm going to make it a habit to do it on Tuesday. And then I've been fairly consistent on doing Fridays. So I just want to make that the plan, and each time I want new submissions. I'll keep reading my work until somebody jumps on and gives me some of their work to read. I still have to praise Anthony Ocampo for doing that, give me some of his work. I do have some work by Chris Hussey that I'm going to read on here shortly. He just needs to give me the permission to do so. Once he sends me an email back, I will get some more work out there. So now, that's going to be the show for the day, guys. Bibliotherapy, working through and developing a response to things that we may feel that come up. Like I said, Britsaterabithia, keeping a journal, and the focus of relieving some of the mental anguish we would deal with a real life situation, we can explore through writing, through journaling, and through reading. So it doesn't always help the best, because sometimes we just flat out don't want to do anything. We sit in bed and watch others' work being played out in real life. So that's another way we're benefiting the writing community, by watching the work on film. So we're constantly benefiting writers and engaging and enjoying their work in one way or the freaking other. And that's what I love. I love that. And that's why the humanities and the arts in a society very much smack of the heart and the mind of that society. So, all right. Please submit your work. Oh, and I got a shout out for those who are all about sharing the love and giving, especially a reader writer, and you have your book. Please, please, please see if you can share your time with Easter Seals. They are a nonprofit 501(c)(3), and there are Easter seals everywhere, but the one I'm talking about in particular is housed in Nevada. And it is a wonderful place where the disabled community can get together and do events. They assist them with all sorts of things, getting them jobs, day programs, communication skills, and a lot of different activities. So that is a wonderful charity. Please, please, please reach out to me on Facebook. I'll share the link with you if you want to make a donation. That way we can make that happen, and I'll share the donation link when I get a chance on the next podcast. In fact, if you find me on Facebook under David Welch, and let's see, I got my name up here on there. Let's see. Click on my profile. I think it's David, if you type in David M. Welch on Facebook, you can definitely find me. The picture is actually a picture of my two kids with Abby from Sesame Street. So that'll be me. So find me. Enjoy listening to this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed some of the work, and I can't wait to get some of your submissions. Again, dwelch9627@gmail.com. Again, thank you. I love your writing community, podcasting community, poetry and fiction community. And again, for those poets out there, go to realisticpoetry.com. Become a member and follow them on Twitter so you can practice your poetry nearly every day, because they have a post nearly every day. And if you're looking for writing tools, please, please, please download Grammarly. Grammarly is a great writing tool, and become familiar with all aspects of Word. All right, love you. Have a great day, people.